the faculty chair for Market Motive and Simply Learn. I took a quick peek at the attendee list, and it's great to see so many of you back for our webinars. I saw, a lot of the names are recognized either when we used to run the Market Motive webinars or from the workshops, the average workshops. So today we're going to talk about, when best practices fail. And this is sort of a fun subject, because when we sort of look at best practices and what they are, right, we need to look at, well, what are best practices? And then the reasons that we sometimes have problems with them, which we'll get into each type, such as simplifying complex problems, some resource constraints, failures due to exceptions, and then we'll get into some Q&A. So first off, we say, what is a best practice? Well, industry standard best practice basically says that it's an accepted way of being effective. But the problem when we get into the sort of like definitions is what one person thinks of best practice may not be someone else, right? We can ask a real simple question and say, who loves broad match? Now, I've asked this to many audiences, right? And at some places, everyone's like, oh, we use it, we love it. Other places, people think it's sort of like a horrible, horrible experience, and that modified is much better. There's some real deep opinions over something as innocuous as, what do you think of broad match? And we'll come back later to why some people think it's great and why others really don't like it. So the question about practice is, who defines this? Right, and this is where a lot of the confusion stems from. Right, we can look at something like a keyword guide from Google, and they put in the best practices, use broad match. We can look at an industry publication like PPC Hero, and one of the most common mistakes they call out is using broad match. So again, we automatically have a problem. So we're going to go through some of these issues that people run into where they're following best practices and they fail, and look at why that happens. So when we think of why they fail, they're generally one of three really common areas. Right? It's taking a very complex problem and trying to put a very simple solution on it. Other times, it's a resource constraint. And then finally, sometimes there are just exceptions to the rule. So let's first look at some simplifying complex problems areas. So we've all heard this, advice before. If your keywords don't work, delete them. I'm pretty sure this is something if I looked at someone and said, hey, just delete all your bad keywords, they would say, okay, that's very reasonable. So this account, the number of keywords with conversions was about 50, right? It's a very small number compared to their total keywords, which is almost 1,100. Looked at their spend. Almost all their spend was off these small sets of keywords. And of course, all their conversions came from it. So they went into their account, like they were told by someone. They selected all keywords with no conversions the past 12 months, and they hit delete. And then time went by. And as time went by, their conversions dropped and dropped and dropped. So this advice led to a very hard-hitting account that took a lot of downfall. Now, here was the problem, right? We all hear the word attribution management, and what does that mean? Well, another way of looking at it is sort of assisted keywords. So when they looked at how people searched in their industry, and they happen to be in the florist industry, where they actually have flowers that people buy, not to give away at Valentine's or something, but to plant in their garden. So everyone searched for things like how to plant roses, raising tulips, something very generic. And they would see this company's ads. It was their nursery. They'd read about the flowers. Then later on, usually 2 to 4 weeks later, they searched company name and bought. So all conversions came from brands. But without the generic searches, no one searches for a brand. And so what happened is they basically deleted all the generic words, which is how people found them initially before they could search for the brand. And so if you have keywords that aren't performing, right? It's important to say, are they not performing due to our attribution model? If you're using last click, may not look like they're performing, but they're driving the searches that lead to the conversions. Now here's another one where the company was focused on phone calls. And so they looked at how many calls they get per day. They said, okay, Mondays, great days, Thursdays, great day, the other days, and not quite as good, and they didn't answer the phone on the weekends. So they looked at their cost per conversion, their conversion rates, their calls per day, and they added bid modifiers so they could increase, obviously, their calls and make a really good CPA. And so after adding bid modifiers, their calls dropped significantly on Mondays, dropped a little bit on Tuesdays, Thursdays and Friday a little bit better, but did not make up their huge drop. And so they looked and they said, well, this makes no sense. We added this huge bid modifier on Monday, and we got less calls. Well, they also had removed themselves from weekend searches. Now, they happen to be in the B2B industry. So we went back and they looked at the analytics and said, okay, when are people really engaged with our website? So what's our conversion rates on white paper downloads or on visits where someone spent at least 3 minutes on the site? And when they looked at that information, it turned out Sunday was their #1 day. This is actually common in B2B, where once it hits Friday afternoon, the web might as well be dead. Everyone goes home early. They're looking at what bars they're going to if they want to do that at night. Right now, the searches happen on Sundays. So for them, when they added those bid modifiers, they said, Sunday we have no calls. We should make our modifiers minus 100%. They got rid of all those researchers on Sundays that were calling them Monday morning. And so again, things like bid modifiers, looking at call data is very useful to do. But just note, sometimes there are delays between searches and when action takes place. And if you're only looking at when the action takes place, you may be missing the bigger picture of when you initially were found. Here's another best practice. If you're in e-commerce, you should bid by ROI or ROAS. I don't think many people would argue with that as the best practice. Now, this company was not sending bids by any kind of logic. Their logic was to look at their keyword bids and say, well, we're in a low position for that, and it's got some conversions. We should raise that bid. Or, you know, we're in a really high position for this. Our CPA is going up a lot on it. We should lower our bid. And so their bids were kind of done based on how they felt about their conversions and their ROAS numbers, but without any rules behind it. So they implemented bid rules. They said, if it gets more than 100 conversions a week, we're going to use last 7 days of data. If it gets more than 100 conversions a month, so things a little longer, we use last 30 days data. If it's something that we sell very few of, we're going to use last 90 days data. Just set a bid rule based on a return on ad spend. So they put in just some simplistic ROAS rules. They can be better than their sort of guessing bids. And their orders went down and their ROAS went down. They went, well, that makes no sense. We're now bidding based upon actual rules. Why? And this should be very consistent now. Why is this so inconsistent? So this company has quite a few different products they sell, but when they sell them, they generally fall into one of two big buckets. One, a small purchase order. Orders under $500. That's 4,500 of their orders. Orders over $10,000, right, which makes up a whole lot of those $500 orders. And they only got 102 of those per month. Now, when they looked at it, though, what happened is, you look at how predictable are your sales. So in their case, of those 10,000 orders, they had 102 that came from 87 different keywords. In other words, rarely did a keyword get 2 large orders. And if it did, it probably didn't the following month. Now, orders over 500, what happens is they have roughly 10 conversions per keyword. Orders over 500, but they have 4,500 of those on only 250 keywords. So their high order number, right, the under 500, is very predictable. Their large order is very unpredictable. And so that was one of the issues they ran into, is that bid rules are based upon predictable repeat behavior. Because their large orders were unpredictable behavior, bid rules wouldn't accommodate that kind of information. So what they realized is that they weren't really ROAS bidding by keyword. What they looked at, their overall, okay, here's how much revenue we usually make per month. We don't know which orders are going to be huge numbers and which will be small. Same keywords could lead to both a large order and a small order. So they said, well, really, we just need to bid by CPA, cost per acquisition, and then see how the large and small orders fall into. And as long as we're getting all the small ones and those large random ones come in as well, and they keep coming in, we'll actually make more money. So they switched from ROAS to CPA bidding. And this fixed all their problems. Now again, CPA, it's usually a lead gen number. It's rarely a number in e-commerce, unless you have unpredictable e-commerce behavior where your top orders are very sporadic and they're random how they occur. Now here's another company. They've been online advertising for a very long time. They are a small company in the landscaper space. And so they're based just out of Washington, D.C. And years ago, right, back in 2011, they looked at where do our customers live. They took the zip code data off their billing information. They said, we're going to target these users exactly in our account. And it worked well. And over the years, they kept getting less orders and less orders and less orders. And they went, all right, why are we getting so many less orders when we still have high bid positions? We haven't changed that much. What's the behavior change that we're missing? And so when we look at DC specifically, location targeting across the whole world is a lot more accurate now than it was 7, 8 years ago. More people are searching on phones, of course, now than it was before. And all of those of you who live in Chicago or Los Angeles or London and think you have bad commuting traffic, it's actually DC is the worst. And so what happened, right, is previously most people were searching at home for landscaper. Now people are searching at work on their phones for landscapers. So here is sometimes the balance, right? So they went ahead and added downtown DC, which they do not service. They won't come into DC to do landscaping. They only do out in Virginia, and they added it. Now, their orders went up, but so did their cost per acquisition, right? So their CPA, of course, went up because they're now reaching people who live in Maryland, live in a different state completely, who just commute to that city. So they have a couple options. They could say, well, we really want to lower our CPA, and so we could remove the district from this, and our CPAs would go down, and our orders would go down. Or we can pay for these commuters. Our CPA will go up a little bit, but our orders will be significantly higher. So this is one of those, there's not a right or wrong scenario here, right? This is, what is your volume capacity? So what happened is they added all DC, it actually breached their volume capacity. So what they did instead is, okay, this is our Virginia campaign. This is our high budget because we know that this area is where people live that we serve, and but it does not make up enough volume to keep every one of our people constantly going. So then here is some more budget we're going to put into the DC downtown region where we know that we're not going to be everyone 100% of the time. We don't want to be there 100% of the time because it increases above our volume capacity. So they put some budget there to supplement what they can't get by advertising out in the suburbs. So we've all heard pick your best ad, right? In search, and this is a global average, which means sometimes the numbers are way higher, sometimes way less. In search, when you pause down, usually to your top ad, you'll see, and you've got 3 or more ads in an ad group, and you actually have statistical significance. You'll often see an increase in more than 20% in clicks and conversions. Remarketing is different. Remarketing, someone has been to your website. They know your offer. They know what they're getting back into. And so what this company is, they had 5 ads running, and they paused down to 1. Now, 1 ad, their absolute best ad, had a lower conversion rate than the blended numbers of all the top 5. It had a lower CTR. And this is something unique to remarketing, where in search, rarely will one person see your exact same ad over and over again. Because why would you search for the same thing for 4 days in a row? Remarketing, people often see your ad more often. And so it's actually fine, it's better to have 3 or 4, even 5 different offers rotating, so that if offer 1 and 2, the user's like, that's not really a compelling reason for me to buy this product or service. And they see the second and third one, like, oh yeah, that's a good reason. And so with remarketing, you're often better keeping a few different offers running as opposed to pausing down to your absolute best number 1, which is different than search by quite a bit. So let's move on to resource constraints. So this is one where best practice may overwhelm resources. So it's not that you don't know the best practice, it's that you don't want to implement it because it would overwhelm what your capacity is. So this was an airline company who came to us. And this company flies from 40 cities to 40 cities. They're in 6 countries and 5 different languages. So we think 40 cities to 40 cities, then you got to reverse cell 40, and then you could have ads that say from city name to city name, from airport code to airport code, from city name to airport code, from airport name to city name, and the numbers get pretty significant pretty fast. And so their question really was, right, if we have keywords like Orlando to Munich flights or Munich to Rome flights, can we put in just the city they're flying to? Can we put in the word, from the city they're leaving from? Do we have to put in both the originating city and the destination city? Because if you can put in just to the city they're going to, right, all of a sudden you keep your ad groups down much, much smaller. As soon as you have to do the destination and the originating city, you've essentially increased all your ad groups by 40-fold. So they ran a simple ad test, right? I mean, it's not simple, it was 10,000 ad groups or so, but it was, what if we do to city, what if we do from city and city to city? Turns out putting both names in there, where they're leaving from, where they're going to, was significantly better. So, okay, we get it, we need to put both in, which means broad matches off the table, modified broad matches off the table because they don't care about what orders, which means it's only exact and phrase match for the entire account now. But then they said, well, what if someone just puts in cheap flights to Orlando or flights to Munich? We don't know where they're coming from. So, our earlier test said it was best to put city to city. So what if we make these campaigns set to individual geographies? And then because we know where they're leaving from, assuming it's where they're searching from, then we can make the ads their city name to where they said they want to fly to, even though they never told us their actual where they're located. Right? So they again ran the ad test, and turns out, yep, guessing someone's city and flights is a good idea. Now, this means we do the math. Every city should have at least 14,400 ad groups. And that's a lot, right, when you start doing that by 40 cities. So they did some more, right? What happens if we do airport names or city names or airport codes? And they did a lot of different types of tests to see how they should organize a simple campaign, which is we fly from 40 cities to 40 cities. I mean, that's the original question, right? Turns out, based on the testing data, they needed 360,000 ad groups. They are 4 people. One of them is more on the analytics side than on the AdWords side and the Bing side. So 120,000 ad groups a person. They said, we can't manage that. Like, so what do we do here when we know what's best practice? We can't do it, right? And so then we said, okay, and don't read all the details here. Right? This is illustration. This is the actual build, but said, okay, what cities don't have that much traffic, right? That we could say, okay, these cities, they're pretty low in total conversions, so we don't have to make 14,400 ad groups for these cities because they're a pretty low number. These other ones, we want to make that sort of combination size for it. And so that way we can say, where do you really not lose much by not going to perfect? Right now, the next question was, though, right, this is a good CEO, CFO question. If I hire someone else, will I make more money than when I'm paying that person in salary? That's a fantastic question, right, to ask when you realize you can't do things perfectly. So you're taking a suboptimal performance and then saying, what do I need to do around a salary versus return standpoint? So we looked at the rules and said, okay, how do we make this simple, yet we go ahead and do this at scale? So if the city gets more than 500 conversions a year, it gets a campaign. What our list is bid modifier only. They're only going to use dynamic remarketing, and they're going to forget some of the others for now. Right? And then for every, I think it was 6 campaigns. I could be wrong on the number. They add, then they go ahead and hire a new person for it because it makes sense on their returns versus salary. And so that sometimes you say, we can't do it. All right, that's fine. So let's cut out the worst stuff first and then put rules that we could show to our CFO, CEO, whatnot. Because if we can do this, this costs us this much, and here's what we get in return. And that way you can even put salary around organization structures. Another question, close variance, especially now that the change to match types happened where you can have an exact match that shows for a plural, shows for a singular, shows for reverse orders. So maintaining true, the old style exact match of, I only want to show for these exact characters being typed in, it's really difficult. So this company, right, they looked at their data, and they're in wholesale restaurant supplies. And if someone searches for something like blue widget, singular, right, they have a high conversion rate, 2.9, but an $81 average order. If they search the plural version of the same word, the conversion rate drops a little bit. Their average order value goes to 673. That's a dramatic difference. That singular S makes a huge difference in how much they're willing to bid for that keyword. So best practice says right here, we should stop and we should manage our ad groups, singular versus plural. Now, any of you who are managing really granular accounts, like that is a mess. And that's why that shouldn't stop there, right, with the best practice. They should say is, what's the opportunity cost? So if you're a small account, you're spending $1,000 a month, you know what? You're going to probably ignore that because your value gain versus how much more money you're going to make is so tiny compared to the sheer amount of work it's going to take. You're not going to see the rewards. Now, if you're a large account, right, you're spending $50,000, $100,000, $1 million a month, and you see, wow, okay, we get 100 orders of, these 20 singular versus plural products a month. By splitting that out, we're going to make another $100,000 a month. It's worth actually managing that way. So again, with some of these, it's not this is the right way, right? It's that this is best, but our return is going to be so minimal by doing best, we can do good enough. Or, hey, this is best, and if we manage it best, we really notice the difference. We should go ahead and make those changes. So another one that I commonly see still to this day, we've all heard of the discovery managed, sometimes called the alpha beta campaign. Now, with this campaign structure, the goal is to have one campaign where you've got a lot of broad match or modified broad match keywords. And then you run those, and if a keyword converts, you make it an exact match in that first campaign. You make it a negative exact match in the first campaign. You add it to the second campaign as an exact match keyword, because your second campaign, that managed campaign or that beta campaign, is going to be where your real conversions come from, right? And so this is a really common workflow in the alpha, beta, or managed discovery workflow. Now, I watched the agency put this into play, and for their top client, it did not take long for them to reach out and say, hey, all right, so we weren't managing them initially, right? Managing what I call hero terms. And we started managing them with this overall structure, and our conversions dropped almost 2,100 in roughly a month. That's a big drop from theoretically having a more organized structure. Now, this is usually a process definition problem. So when you looked at their keywords, this is what was happening. Are you showing? No, because people don't search enough, right? So what they needed to do, right, is not just say, this word's got a conversion, we make it an exact match. What they need to do is say, all right, we need to add this keyword to our managed campaign only when we're not going to run into low volume problems when we add them. So they defined what this term should be. Instead of saying we add any keyword to the conversion, we say if it's got at least 35 impressions and 2 conversions a month for 3 consecutive months. Now we know it keeps converting and it keeps having enough impressions, it will consistently show. As soon as they put that process definition into place, they got the benefits of the campaign structure, right? The conversions went up. And so when you have processes in place, it says, when this happens, we do this. When this happens, we do this. Make sure those processes are well defined. I can't count the agencies I've walked into where they have defined processes. And you sit down with analyst 1 and you look at how they do it, and you sit down with analyst 2 and you look at how they do it, you sit down with analyst 3 and look at how they do it, and so forth. And while they all have, quote, the same process, the way it's implemented is often dramatically different because some of the data points weren't defined in what that process looks like. Now, there are times there's just exceptions, right, to the rule. So I think we've all heard this before. Don't send all your traffic to the homepage, right? This is usually PPC 101. Find the most relevant page for a keyword. That's where the traffic should go. Now, I can't show this client's website, but I can show 2 very similar ones. So one, it's in the nanny space. So who's someone you're hiring to come in your house and look after your kids. And so the one was, look at home page, like this is the nanny source page, where you get there, you see, okay, find a job, hire a caregiver, and hey, we do background checks on everyone before they get to our database. Right. Second one is, hey, if you're in Chicago, you need a nanny, here's some resumes of people who are in our system. You join, you get access to Kate and Sabrina and so forth, who will come right to your house and look after your kids. So, of course, they looked at their site and went, wow, if someone's in Chicago, we should use that kind of a geo page. In Los Angeles, we should use our Los Angeles resumes, and so forth and so forth. So they didn't use their home page, right? They're using all geo pages. And then they went, well, what if we actually test our home page, right? We don't want to just make assumptions. We should test this. So they tested initially, and their cost per conversion was higher on their home page than the city landing pages, right, which is exactly what you would expect. The conversion rate was high on the city landing pages. Now, the thing is, this is aggregate data across networks, which Overall, aggregate data is useless. You must always segment data once, sometimes twice, to get to the real heart of what's happening. So they segmented this by search and display. And they looked at search and went, wow, for search, our conversion rate for our home page is almost double those city-specific pages. On display, it's the exact opposite. They have run this test probably, the first time they ran this test was 2005. I believe they have run this test 3 times a year since then. So that's 36 times over 12 years. Their homepage is still best for search. They spend a couple $100,000 a month. Every search click goes to their homepage. Display, the city pages are different. They work better for display. Now, when you think about the user, right? So if someone is searching for nanny services, this person has thought about this. Who is coming into my house to take care of my kids, right? So family, money, time, right? The things that we want part of, we have to be really careful as marketers, right? This affects one of the big 3, family, right? So on display network, it's not so the same, right? Someone's reading an article about their favorite, football scores or recipes, and they see a display ad. Someone who will come to their house and watch their kids for them. They're like, wow, that sounds like a great idea, and they click on it. Oh, people in my local area. So it's a very different mindset. And so sometimes we'll see very different behavior on sites by network. And so when you do your test, you should always, even landing pages, segment out search versus display. Now, this sounds like something you'd never want to do, right? We want to lower our quality score on purpose. So this company, we look at conversion rates by quality score for the same keyword. Their conversion rates are higher when their quality score is lower. Now that sounds very counterintuitive. Now they happen to be in an industry where there's a lot of B2B and a tremendous amount of B2C searches for the same keyword. So they sell safety gates. So there's 2 types of safety gates. There's one costs, 20, 30 bucks that you keep kids and pets out of an area of your house. The other one starts at $3,000, goes up to a few $1 million, meant for industrial plants and factories. So if you look at the ones in blue, those are all B2B. They say industrial safety gates, OSHA compliance, right? Free quotes. So this is really different. So all 3 of those can very quickly raise their quality scores. They take out the word industrial. They take out the words OSHA compliance, powder coating, and all of a sudden it'll look like a B2C ad. They'll get lots of clicks. Their click-through rate will go up a lot. Their quality scores will follow and go up as well, and the conversion rates will plummet. So in areas, B2B being a really good example, you're often better off with lower quality scores because you're pre-qualifying users from ever wanting to click on your ads in the first place. Now, speed is a really funny thing. Speed does not matter. The perception of speed is all that matters. So there was an airport, and the airport had this problem where everybody complained that it took too long to get their bags when they landed. So the airport, they made some adjustments to baggage, they hired more baggage people, and they got down to the industry standard for a small airport of 8 minutes. The complaints didn't change. Everyone complained, it takes too long to get my bags. So they looked at it. Okay, what does someone do when they get off the plane? Well, it's a small airport. They get off the plane, they walk about 100 steps, and they're at baggage. So they spend 30 seconds getting to baggage, 7.5 minutes waiting. So the airport went, well, we've got these terminals that we don't really use. We're going to move all the gates over there. So they moved the gates to a different terminal where the user gets off the plane. They spend 6 minutes walking to the baggage. They spend 2 minutes waiting for the baggage. Complaint stopped. The user's time from getting off the plane to getting their bags was 8 minutes. That didn't change. What changed was the perception of how long it took to get their bags. Right? So it's not speed that matters. It's the perception of speed that matters. This was a site, it's a database lookup site. So you go to it, you enter your name, you enter your zip code, you choose the data type you want, and the system starts looking up data, right? And so they could show their results instantaneously. But they want, well, what happens if we spin a wheel that says we're looking at these 100 things and these 100 things and these 100 things and run a little banner of benefits at the same time? Well, we get better conversions by appearing to work harder for the user. So they ran this test in 15-second increments from 0 seconds to 215 seconds. And it turns out around the 2.5-minute wait point was their best conversion rates. They're not doing anything. They just have a little spinny wheel that sits there and goes, searching databases this to this, did you know, blah, blah, blah. Spinning, blah, blah, blah. But people get invested in time. So what happened was people initially went, this takes too long, they left, right? They had a quick drop-off in conversions. They waited longer. There's a threshold, but once someone passed it, they were so invested in waiting. It was more painful to leave and think about the service than to just wait a few more seconds, right? So it's important to also think about that perception of time to your users. In certain cases, mobile, yeah, fast is very, very useful. Sometimes it's good to think about what their perception of how things are loading as opposed to real items, right? Load time is one of those funny things that if you load your top elements very quickly, the rest of your page could take a really long time to load, but the user perceives it as fast because the top visual elements loaded first. So there's a company who, we follow the advice we started with, right? They looked at all their broad match keywords and they changed it all to modified broad. Said, all right, we give in, we understand everyone hates broad match, we're going to go to modified broad match and see what happens. Well, their conversion rates did go up. Their conversions dropped significantly once they switched. Now, broad match does quite a few things that modified broad does not. One of them being matching the multilingual queries. So this company, they're obviously an Arabic company, and they have a lot of queries that include both English or French and Arabic. And so modified broad doesn't show across language types. Broad match will match to queries that include both languages. So what's interesting is when we ask people, how much do you like broad match? The further the natural language is from English, the more people like broad match. Usually the closer their natural language is to English, the less they like it. But there's a lot of good uses of broad match, right? Whether it's the long tail, RLSAs, target and bid, you're only reaching users in your audience list. Research, right? There's a lot of good uses. Depends on why you're using it. So before we're about to get to questions, but best practices, they are that way for a reason. They're a great starting place. If you're newer, you're an intermediate user, you need something to get started, best practices are the way to go because they work for most people. But they might not always work for you. And the three main reasons they don't work is due to simplifying complex problems. They may be ignored for good reason, for resource constraints, or actual exceptions. Those aren't common, but they do exist. All right, I'm going to see if Dan has rejoined us, and we can do a little bit of questions and answers as we go on over. So, Dan, are you back with us?
I bet I am. Thank you, Brad. That was great. So, everyone, I don't know if you were given this instruction before, but if you'd be happy to ask a question, then feel free to either pop it in chat to us or in the Q&A function, which is they're both in the upper right-hand corner of your window there. And we just have one question coming in so far, asking about. I know you mentioned about the language differences and broad match catching all that, but Gary would like to know what other differences in best practices are there between international campaigns and domestic campaigns? So can you, because he's had trouble taking the best practices that have worked for him in the US and then tried to apply those to the rest of the world and got completely different results. Do you have any other advice?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? So I will make sure for everyone else in the call that we catch the language one correct, right? So when you choose your languages, that is based on operating system and browser preferences and so forth. It is not based upon the language the user searches with, right? So my computer is obviously English. If I go to Germany and I'm on google.de and I search in English, even if you have English keywords, if your language setting is German, I won't see your ads. So it's very useful, especially in Europe, to open up language settings. Geo-targeting is not quite as accurate in a lot of European cities. You take London. London is something like, what, a third of the UK population? But it's not super accurate there. Same for Netherlands. Yet Germany and France, it's highly accurate. So sometimes you do have, in the US, you really, in certain areas like Chicago, right, you really can target a mile around a business, and you'll be pretty decent with that. That doesn't work nearly as well when you go internationally. The other thing with international that's interesting is, in fact, one of our other decks we did, we have this, where the language helps you understand if someone's a tourist or a local. So for instance, I work with a car rental company, and if someone searches in a language not native to the country, they're generally a tourist. So if you search in German in Italy, right, you're probably a tourist, and for them, they're in car rentals, they have better conversion rates, right, than someone searching in Italian in Italy. Where if you are, landscaping services, that's obviously not true. It's a little bit different. I'm sure there are others. Those are the ones that just immediately pop up on top of my head.
Great, thanks. Those are some wonderful points. Well, that is actually the other questions were pretty easy to answer offline as it was. So, and by the way, everyone, we will be sharing the recording of this webinar with you. So be checking your email in about a week or so for another message from us, and feel free to share it as much as you like. Brad, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, right? I think we covered a lot of good stuff. It's, best practices, I'm a fan of them. I obviously write a lot of them, but they're starting places. For many people, they're also ending places. But just because someone says this is the best way to do it, does not mean that applies to you. So it's a good idea to always, check your assumptions on occasion just to make sure that the base set of assumptions you're building things on actually does apply to your industry, your account, and so forth.
That's great. That's a wonderful closing point, because testing never gets out of style.
Never.
So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And we will be sending an email with a link to the recording to you later. Thanks again, Brad. This was really informative, and we'll talk to you again soon. Have a great evening or day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dan. Bye-bye.